September 28, 1987. Take a good look, folks. Clay Harrison stood on the tailgate of his black Ford pickup, pointing across the road toward 12 acres of dry corn and gray river stones. Because in about an hour, you're going to watch the most expensive pile of rocks in Nebraska cost this boy his family farm. The crowd exploded with laughter. Maybe he'll harvest gravel. Hope those rocks know how to pay the bank. More than 80 people had gathered beside Ethan Miller's south field that morning. Pickup trucks lined both sides of the gravel road. Farmers leaned against tailgates with coffee in their hands. Teenagers stood on hay wagons for a better view. The photographer from the Lexington newspaper had arrived before sunrise. They had not come because Ethan Miller was famous. They had not come because they expected a record harvest. They had come to watch a poor young farmer lose everything. Even Walter Briggs, the local banker, glanced toward the leather briefcase sitting on the passenger seat of his truck. Inside were the foreclosure papers. If Ethan failed, all that remained was his signature. Only Ethan was not laughing. He stood beside his father's faded red Farmall. The paint had faded almost pink. The rear fenders were held together with mismatched bolts, and the muffler rattled softly in the autumn wind. Ethan placed one grease-stained hand on the hood. "I hope you were right, Dad. If those 12 rocky acres failed, he would lose more than a wager. He would lose the land his grandfather had cleared with horses, the field where his father had taught him to drive, the cottonwood tree where 3 generations of Millers had carved their children's heights into the bark. The land had carried his family's name for nearly 70 years. What nobody beside that road understood was that the rocks had already done exactly what Ethan had carried them there to do. The harvest would not create a miracle. It would reveal whether patience had been enough. 4 months earlier, Ethan Miller walked into Dawson County Bank wearing a work shirt frayed at the collar. His hands were cracked from spring repairs. Grease remained beneath each fingernail, no matter how hard he scrubbed. Walter Briggs opened Ethan's loan file. "How much do you need?" "Enough for seed corn on 20 acres, Ethan said, "and enough to repair the Farmall." Walter studied the papers. "Your father borrowed 3 times last year. My father died in October." "I know, Ethan." Walter lowered his voice. "But the bank doesn't lend based on grief." Before Ethan could answer, the front door opened. Clay Harrison entered without waiting behind anyone. "20,000, Clay announced to the teller. "Cash." Then he noticed Ethan. "You borrowing for seed?" Ethan did not answer. Clay glanced at the loan papers. "To grow what? Rocks?" Several customers laughed. Walter did not join them, but he did not stop them either. "I can approve $4,000, Walter said, "at 12.5%. Clay whistled. "You're starting the season with a loan that'll bury you before harvest." He slapped Ethan on the shoulder. "Don't worry, Miller. I'll buy that south field before Christmas." Clay walked away smiling. The south field was the poorest ground on Ethan's farm. The topsoil was shallow. Summer winds stripped away moisture. Heavy rain carved channels through the slope and carried loose soil into the ditch. Clay had offered to buy those 20 acres twice. Everyone said Ethan should accept. But near the fence stood an old cottonwood tree. Faded marks remained on its bark, each carved by Ethan's father on a different birthday. His grandfather had taught his father to plow there. His father had taught Ethan to drive there. How did a man place a price on that? Ethan signed the loan. That afternoon, he entered the machine shed looking for cultivator bolts. The building smelled of grain dust, old grease and rust. Broken chains hung from nails. Worn bearings filled coffee cans on a shelf. Behind his father's wooden toolbox, Ethan found a narrow cedar box. Inside were old photographs, seed receipts, rainfall records, and 3 notebooks tied together with faded string. The first belonged to Samuel Miller, Ethan's grandfather. Most pages contained ordinary farm records, planting dates, weather notes, calving records, yield totals. Then Ethan reached the summer of 1936. Across the top of one page, Samuel had written 4 words. The wind nearly won. The next pages described drought, failing crops, and neighbors abandoning their farms. Samuel could not afford irrigation. He could not afford fertilizer. He could not afford another failed year. So every evening after chores, he hauled flat limestone rocks from the Platte River. He placed them in bands between the crop rows. Not over the seed, not against the stalks, only across the exposed ground. According to Samuel's notes, the stones shaded the soil, slowed the hot wind near the surface, and reduced how quickly moisture escaped. During hard rain, they broke the force of the water before it struck the earth. One sketch showed 18-inch bands with open spaces around every plant. Another page contained a warning: "The rocks are not feeding the corn, they are protecting the soil." Ethan read the sentence 3 times. Outside the kitchen window, the south field stretched beneath a pale sky. Brown, dry, waiting. That night he opened his father's notebook. The last complete entry read, October 12, 1986. Ethan turned 22 today. Happy birthday, son. I love you. The handwriting was shaky. The next page was dated October 18th, the day Daniel Miller died beneath a failed hydraulic loader. Ethan closed the notebook. He found an old photograph of himself and his father beside the cottonwood tree. For several minutes he sat alone in the kitchen, then he wiped his face. "What would you say, Dad?" He could almost hear the answer. "Don't let them see you're scared." Ethan stood. "All right, they won't." The next morning, he drove the farmall toward the Platte River. He selected 12 acres on the worst section of the southern slope. After the corn emerged, he began laying stones in narrow strips between the rows. Each stone had to be loaded by hand, unloaded by hand, placed by hand. The first wagon took nearly a day, the second took less. By the 4th trip, people had begun to notice. Old Mrs. Jenkins slowed her station wagon beside the field. "What are you building out there?" "Nothing." She looked at the rocks. "Then why are you carrying all that?" "My grandfather wrote about it." Mrs. Jenkins nodded politely. By Monday, the town had heard. By Wednesday, someone had written on the chalkboard at Henderson Feed and Grain, "Rock Farmers Forecast, 100% chance of stones." Men laughed every time they read it. Ethan bought his feed and left without speaking. Outside, Clay Harrison stood on the loading dock. A wagon filled with stones rattled behind Ethan's farmall. "Hey, Miller," Ethan stopped. "You building a road?" "No." "A driveway?" "No." Clay smiled. "Then what are you doing with those rocks?" "I'm placing them between my corn rows." For 1 second, nobody spoke. Then the laughter exploded. Clay nearly spilled his coffee. "You mean you're planting rocks?" A teenager shouted. "Guess he's expecting a stone harvest." The laughter followed Ethan out of town. The cruelest moment came later that afternoon. Ethan had stopped beside the feed store to load 2 bags of seed corn. Clay walked toward the truck holding a pocket knife. "Let me help you with that." Before Ethan understood what he meant, Clay cut open one of the bags. Seed poured onto the gravel. Golden kernels scattered beneath the trucks. Clay pressed his boot into them. "Don't waste your time planting this, Miller. Rocks don't need water." Ethan knelt and began picking up the seed. Clay stood over him. "My offer for the South 20 still stands." Ethan kept gathering kernels. "Is that what you told my father?" Clay's smile disappeared. "Your father was a stubborn fool, too." He leaned closer. "And look where it got him." Then he walked away. Ethan remained on his knees after the laughter faded. He picked up every clean kernel he could find. When he returned home, he placed the torn bag on his father's workbench. He did not cry. He did not drive back into town. He loaded the wagon again. Over the next several weeks, Ethan carried stones from the Platte River until the skin on his palms cracked open. He wrapped his hands in strips cut from an old flour sack. The farmall's radiator began leaking. A wagon bearing failed. Weeds grew in places where the stone bands prevented him from cultivating. He removed them by hand. Some nights, he fell asleep at the kitchen table wearing his boots. Every day, people drove past the field. Some shouted jokes. Others stopped simply to stare. Clay turned Ethan's work into public entertainment. At the church picnic, he donated a wheelbarrow filled with river stones to the children's raffle. A sign tied to the handles read, "First prize, 1 acre of Ethan Miller's harvest." People laughed until the pastor removed it. Ethan stood near the pie table and watched. Clay approached him with a plate of barbecue. "Don't take it personally," Clay said. "Folks need something to laugh about." Ethan looked at the sign. "Why me?" Clay chewed slowly. "Because you make it easy." For the first time, Ethan felt something hotter than shame. He wanted to throw the wheelbarrow through Clay's windshield. Instead, he folded the sign and handed it back. "You keep it." Clay smirked. "Why?" "You may want to remember it." Clay's smile weakened. Only for a moment. After he walked away, A young woman approached Ethan, carrying 2 cups of lemonade. Sarah Harrison, Clay's daughter. She and Ethan had attended school together, though they had spoken little since graduation. She handed him 1 cup. "My father is going to see you talking to me," Ethan said. "Let him." Sarah sat beside him on the grass. "He called my father a fool." "My father says things designed to hurt people," Sarah replied. "That does not make them true." Ethan looked toward Clay. "Most people believe him. Most people are afraid of him." Sarah rose. "I hope you're right about those rocks." It was the first kind thing anyone had said to Ethan in weeks. By late June, Clay's corn stood taller, greener, and more uniform than Ethan's. Clay had deep soil, a new hybrid, and center pivot irrigation. Ethan's plants were shorter. Some rows were pale. From the road, the stone-covered field looked more like a construction site than a farm. Walter Briggs visited with another offer from Clay. It was enough money to clear Ethan's debt and replace the farmall. "This is a way out," Walter said. "A way out of what?" "Of losing everything." Ethan looked through the kitchen window. The stones appeared as pale bands crossing the slope. Walter followed his eyes. "I don't understand what you're doing." "You don't have to." "I do if that field is supposed to save the loan." "It doesn't have to save the loan," Ethan said. "It has to survive summer." Walter closed his folder. "Clay's field is twice the height of yours. Right now, I expect December to come whether you're ready or not." Walter left the offer on the table. Ethan did not sign it, but he did not tear it up. He placed it beneath his grandfather's notebook. That frightened him. For the first time, he wondered whether Clay might be right. On July 3rd, Robert Klein from the county extension office arrived in a dusty pickup. Robert had studied agronomy at the University of Nebraska, but he had grown up repairing irrigation pipes and baling hay. He knelt between Ethan's rows and lifted several stones. The soil beneath them felt cooler. He inserted a thermometer into the ground. "What does it say?" Ethan asked. 4 degrees cooler than the open soil." Ethan waited. Robert stood. "That doesn't mean the stones will increase yield." "I know. They may create drainage problems in low ground. I left gaps where water naturally crosses." Robert glanced up the slope. "You noticed that yourself?" "The first rain moved a few stones. I changed the layout." Robert studied him. "You need comparison rows. Without stones? Same seed. Same planting date. Same field. Otherwise, if this works, Clay will say the rocks had nothing to do with it. Leaving some rows untreated might cost Ethan grain, but he understood. He marked several control strips with white posts. Before leaving, Robert looked over the field. "I'm not saying you're right. I know. I'm saying this is worth measuring." It was the first time anyone had spoken about the stones without laughing. 4 days later, the heat arrived. The temperature reached 100 degrees, then 103. A ridge of high pressure settled over central Nebraska. Day after day, the sky remained empty. Clay's irrigation system threw silver arcs across his west field. His corn stood tall and green. Ethan's remained shorter. Clay stopped beside the fence. "You'll need a ladder to find my ears," he said. "You'll need a shovel to find yours. The corn is still growing. So is mine." Clay pointed across the stones. "I increased my offer. I saw. Take it before harvest proves what everyone knows." "What does everyone know?" "That land belongs to somebody who can use it." Ethan walked toward the fence. "My father used that land. Your father struggled on it. My grandfather used it. Different time. And I'm using it now." Clay shook his head. "Hauling rocks is not farming." Ethan looked directly at him. "Then why are you so worried?" Clay's face hardened. He drove away without answering. By mid-July, cracks appeared beside the roads. Corn leaves across the county curled beneath the afternoon heat. Ethan checked the south field each morning. Beneath the bare soil, his metal rod met resistance quickly. Under the stone bands, it pushed deeper. The rocks did not create water. They helped the soil surrender it more slowly. The difference first appeared in the leaves. In the untreated strips, the corn curled before noon. In the protected rows, it remained open until early afternoon. Nothing about Ethan's field looked miraculous. It was not the greenest. It was not the tallest. It was simply the last field on that road to begin giving up. When Robert returned, he pushed a moisture probe beneath the stones. Then he tested the untreated ground. The bare soil crumbled in his hand. The protected soil held together. Same field, Ethan said. Same field, Robert agreed. A pickup slowed on the road. Two farmers watched from inside. By supper, the county knew the extension agent was measuring Ethan's soil. The jokes did not stop. But now they carried doubt. What if the boy had found something? Clay heard the rumors at the feed store. Cool dirt does not fill a grain bin, he said. But the next morning, he checked his irrigation pressure before sunrise. By July 22nd, Dawson County had gone 3 weeks without meaningful rain. Clay's irrigation pump failed during the hottest part of the season. A repair crew replaced a bearing. The system ran for 6 hours, then began pulling sand from the well. Clay shut it down before the pump destroyed itself. For nearly 2 days, his field received no water. From the road, the damage was invisible. The corn remained tall, but it was entering pollination. The heat dried the silks while pollen was being released. Inside the forming ears, kernels were being lost. Ethan's corn had developed more slowly. The poor soil and lower fertility had delayed it. All spring, the delay had made him look foolish. Now much of his crop would pollinate after the worst heat had passed. Ethan did not know whether that would be enough. He only knew the plants were still standing. On July 26th, Dawson County held its summer equipment auction. Ethan went looking for a replacement radiator. Clay spotted him beside a row of used cultivators. "They've got your seed corn over there," Clay called, pointing toward a pile of broken concrete. The crowd laughed, not as loudly as before. Clay followed Ethan. "What's wrong? Heat getting to your rocks? My corn is standing. So is mine. Your irrigation wasn't." Several men looked at one another. Clay's smile disappeared. He climbed onto the auction trailer. "Let's settle this." The auctioneer lowered his microphone. Clay pointed at Ethan. "This boy believes his 12 acres of rock-covered corn can beat my Westfield." Ethan had never said that publicly, but denying it now would sound like surrender. Clay continued. "Same acreage, same scale, same moisture adjustment." Someone shouted, "Make it official! If his field beats mine, I'll pay his seed bill next spring." The crowd murmured. Clay raised one finger. "If his field loses, he accepts my offer for the South 20. The laughter vanished. Everyone knew Ethan's debt. Everyone knew Clay wanted the land. Walter Briggs stepped forward. "Private debt is not auction entertainment." Clay ignored him. He held out his hand. "What do you say, rock farmer?" Ethan looked around the crowd, at the men who had mocked him, at Robert Klein, at Walter, looking ashamed. Then he remembered Clay's boot grinding his seed into the road. "Not your best 12 acres, Ethan said. Clay narrowed his eyes. "What? We marked 12 continuous acres before harvest. No choosing the best rows. Robert verifies both fields. You need somebody to protect you? I need somebody you cannot buy a beer and call a witness." A few men laughed. This time they were laughing at Clay. His cheeks reddened. "Fine." He offered his hand again. Ethan did not take it yet. "If I win, you pay the seed bill." "Yes. And you tell these people the stones were not foolish." Clay smiled. "That important to you?" "No." Ethan looked toward the crowd. "But it seems important to you." More laughter. Clay's jaw tightened. "And when you lose, you sell." Ethan shook his hand. "Measured at harvest. Measured at harvest." By the next morning, the diner was calling it the Rockfield Challenge. The newspaper announced the expected harvest date. The county began waiting. That night, Ethan stood alone in the south field. The control rows were drying faster. The difference was real, but he did not know whether moisture in the ground would become grain in the bin. He opened his grandfather's notebook. "The rocks are not feeding the corn, they are protecting the soil." "Then protect it," Ethan whispered. The drought ended on August 11th. It ended violently. A wall of black clouds moved east across Dawson County. The sky turned the color of steel. The wind fell silent. Then the storm broke. Rain hammered the machine shed so hard Ethan could not see the barn. Within 20 minutes, the farm lane became a stream. For weeks, he had prayed for water. Now too much was falling at once. If the stones trapped runoff in the wrong places, they could drown the roots. If the bands shifted downhill, they could crush the stalks. Ethan could only watch. Nearly 4 inches fell in 90 minutes. As soon as the rain weakened, he pulled on his boots and ran toward the field. At the top of the slope, he stopped. Most of the stone bands remained in place. Water had moved through the gaps, slowing as it passed. Several stones had shifted. A few plants leaned, but the soil was still there. Then Ethan stepped into one of the untreated control strips. Small channels cut between the rows. Loose earth had washed downhill. Several roots were exposed. The rocks had not made the field invincible. They had prevented the rain from taking more than it gave. Trucks began stopping along the road. Farmers climbed out and stared. Clay arrived last. His west field had suffered visible runoff. Brown stains marked the ditch where topsoil had collected. He entered Ethan's field and kicked one of the stones. Still have to harvest it. Yes. Clay returned to his truck. For the first time all summer, he left without laughing. 3 days later, yellow leaves appeared in a low corner of Ethan's field. Water had collected beneath stone bands laid too densely across a shallow depression. The ground remained saturated. The very method protecting most of the field was damaging part of it. Ethan removed stones from the lowest rows. He widened the drainage gaps and cut shallow channels with a shovel. Clay watched from the road. Thought the rocks solved everything. They were never supposed to solve everything. You said they would save the field. No, you said I was planting them. Robert examined the wet ground. This is what testing looks like, he told Clay. You find a problem and adjust. Convenient. Your irrigation pump failed. Did you abandon irrigation? Clay said nothing. Robert turned to Ethan. Mark this section separately. Why? So we know what the mistake cost you. The field no longer represented a miracle. It represented an idea tested honestly enough to reveal both its strength and weakness. By late August, Clay's corn still looked better from the road. Tall stalks, clean rows, dark leaves. But many ears were poorly filled after the heat during pollination. Ethan's plants were shorter, some were uneven. Yet most ears were dense from base to tip. The control rows showed smaller ears, more leaf damage, and greater erosion. Robert recorded the results. Ethan asked for a prediction. Samples can lie, Robert said. Harvest tells the truth. As September passed, Clay became increasingly defensive. He accused Ethan of selecting better ground. Robert placed numbered flags around both 12-acre blocks. The co-op verified the boundaries. The damaged low corner remained inside Ethan's section. The eroded rows remained inside Clay's. Nobody could remove failure from either field. 2 weeks before harvest, Walter visited Ethan again. The field may do well. May. Clay's offer is still available. Are you here as the banker or his messenger? Walter lowered his eyes. As the banker, Ethan asked how much money he needed by December. Walter named the amount. A strong crop, the sale of 2 calves and the rest of Ethan's grain might be enough. Barely. If the field fails, Walter asked, I sell equipment before I sell land. That farmall will not bring much. I know. Walter looked toward the south field. I should have stopped Clay at the auction. You tried. Not hard enough. Ethan said nothing. Walter put on his hat. Your father thought Clay confused success with being right. Ethan glanced toward the rows. Was he? Walter walked toward his truck. We'll know after harvest. The night before the weighing, Ethan walked the marked acreage alone. Brown leaves rattled in the wind. The stones had sunk partway into the soil. They no longer looked foolish. They looked as though they had been waiting there for decades. Ethan reached the cottonwood tree and touched one of the marks carved by his father. Then he returned to the farmhouse and placed the notebooks on the kitchen table. He did not sleep. By sunrise, the road was already filling with trucks. Clay arrived in his black Ford. Walter came carrying his leather briefcase. Sarah stood near the back of the crowd. Robert gathered the witnesses and explained the rules. Clay's 12 acres would be harvested first. His new combine entered the rows. The wide header swallowed corn with an effortless rhythm. Clay moved through the crowd, shaking hands. When the final load was weighed, Robert wrote Clay's result on a large board. The yield was respectable, strong enough to make several farmers applaud. Clay turned toward Ethan. Your turn, rock farmer. Ethan did not own a combine. Harold Jensen had offered the use of an older machine. Harold had laughed at Ethan in June. Now he held open the cab door. You want to run it? You know the machine better. Harold looked toward the field. You know the ground better. Ethan climbed into the passenger seat. The combine entered the first rows. The opening section included the storm-damaged corner. The corn was thin. The grain tank filled slowly. Clay folded his arms. When the first load was weighed, Ethan was behind. A man near the road called, "Should have planted gravel." Only a few people laughed. The second section performed better. The third crossed a control strip, and the grain flow dropped again. Harold glanced at Ethan. That bare section is costing you. It's supposed to. That's a strange thing to say with your farm on the line. It's supposed to tell the truth. Clay walked toward Walter's truck. Get those papers ready. Walter placed one hand on the briefcase. He did not answer. The combine entered the center of the field. Here the stone bands had been laid evenly. The soil had survived the storm. The corn had escaped the worst heat. Grain began entering the tank faster. Harold leaned toward the gauges. That's different. Another truck crossed the scale. The crowd became quiet. Ethan was closing the gap. The next load pushed him slightly ahead. A murmur moved along the road. Clay stopped smiling, but several acres remained. One contained another control strip. Another touched the wet corner. The next load reduced Ethan's advantage. Clay began speaking again. Plenty of bad ground left. The combine entered the final rise. This was the ground Clay had always called the place where good seed went to die. It faced the hottest southern wind. The protected rows were not spectacular. They were simply consistent. Harold watched grain pour into the tank. You may have something here. Not until it's weighed. The final truck pulled onto the scale. The crowd moved closer. The workers recorded the weight. Robert checked the adjustment, then checked it again. Nobody spoke. Not the farmers, not the teenagers, not Walter Briggs, not Clay. Robert picked up the black marker and walked toward the board. Ethan looked at the cottonwood tree. He remembered his father's hand guiding his on the steering wheel. He remembered Clay's boot crushing the seed. He remembered carrying rocks with bleeding palms. Robert wrote the final result. For several seconds, the crowd remained silent. Ethan had won. Not by an impossible amount, not by enough to turn the field into a fairy tale, but by enough that nobody could dismiss it. The poorest ground on the Miller farm had produced more corn than Clay Harrison's irrigated west field. Someone began clapping, then another. Harold removed his cap. Farmers who had laughed at Ethan lowered their eyes before joining the applause. Walter opened his briefcase. He looked at the foreclosure papers, then folded them once, placed them beneath the other documents and closed the case. Sarah smiled through tears. Clay stood beside the board. His face had gone pale. He stared at the result as though the numbers might change if he waited long enough. Robert raised one hand. We also measured Ethan's untreated rows. He explained that the unprotected ground had lost more moisture, suffered greater erosion, and produced less grain. He also explained the drainage problem. The rocks did not create rain, Robert said. They did not replace fertilizer, seed, or good management. But on this slope, during this season, they protected enough soil and moisture to preserve the crop. Clay seized on the imperfection. You said they caused drainage trouble. They did, where Ethan placed them too densely. So they failed. No, Robert said. Ethan found the failure and corrected it. The crowd turned toward Clay. The joke had become evidence. Clay stepped closer to Ethan. You got lucky with pollination. Yes, my pump could have kept running. Yes, the storm could have gone another direction. Yes, Clay raised his voice. Then the rocks didn't beat me. Ethan looked across the field. This was never about beating you. You put your land into a bet. You put my land into the bet. The crowd became still. Ethan continued. I accepted because you spent the summer telling these people I was too foolish to keep what my family built. Clay looked around. Everyone who had laughed was watching him. The scale stood behind him. The board displayed the result. There was nowhere left to hide. Clay swallowed. I was wrong about the field. Nobody moved. And I was wrong to call the method foolish. His jaw tightened. You won, the sentence carried across the road. Clay did not collapse. He did not beg. But for the first time in years, the richest farmer in Dawson County had been publicly corrected by the poorest young man in the crowd. The laughter was gone. Clay promised to pay Ethan's seed bill. Pay the co-op directly, Ethan said. I don't want anyone saying you handed me money. Clay nodded and turned away. Clay, he stopped. Ethan pointed toward the storm-damaged corner. Don't copy the stones blindly. Clay looked back. Why would I copy them? Because next spring, half the county will. Several farmers smiled. Use them only where the slope and soil make sense. Leave drainage gaps. Test a small area first. Clay stared at him. You're giving me advice? No. Ethan looked toward the people beside the road. I'm making sure nobody ruins a field trying to prove I was right. That answer changed the way the county saw Ethan more than the harvest did. He had every reason to humiliate Clay. He did not. He had every reason to guard the method and let others repeat his mistakes. He did not. His victory was not that Clay had lost. His victory was that the land remained his. As the crowd dispersed, Sarah approached Ethan. Clay's truck was already disappearing down the road. She handed Ethan a small envelope. Inside was a photograph taken when they were 16. They stood beside the cottonwood tree, laughing. Sarah had one arm around Ethan's shoulder. Ethan held an ear of corn like a microphone. You kept this? I kept a lot of things. Ethan looked at her. Your father. Let me worry about my father. She stepped closer. When he loses badly. But when you win, you don't even act like you won. Sarah looked toward the field. That's why you'll always be better than him. 3 weeks later, Ethan sold his grain. The crop did not make him wealthy. After paying fuel, repairs, and overdue bills, little remained. But on December 18th, he entered Walter Briggs's office and placed a check on the desk. Walter examined it. This keeps the loan current. I know. You still have a hard year ahead. I know. Walter stamped the receipt. The South 20 stays yours. Ethan folded the receipt and placed it inside his father's notebook. As he turned to leave, Walter spoke again. Your father came here the week before he died. Ethan stopped. He told me something I didn't understand. Walter opened a drawer and removed a yellowed sheet of paper. Daniel Miller's handwriting crossed the page. The rocks are a shield, not a miracle. Watch the land. Change what the old instructions got wrong. He was testing the method too, Walter said. He never finished. Ethan stared at the words. He knew? Walter nodded. He said if anyone could finish it, you could. Ethan tried to speak. Nothing came. He folded the page carefully and walked into the winter wind. The following spring, farmers began visiting the Miller farm. Not every field was suitable for stone mulch. Some ground was too flat. Some soil drained too slowly. Some farmers used crop residue instead. Robert Klein organized proper comparison plots. The method never became a miracle solution. In wet years, the benefit was small. In low ground, careless placement caused problems. Moving stones required labor. But on dry, wind-exposed slopes, the bands helped conserve moisture and reduce erosion. The county learned something more important than a farming technique. It learned that old knowledge did not deserve blind worship. But it did not deserve blind laughter either. Clay paid the seed bill as promised. For years, he and Ethan remained distant. Then one dry summer, one of Clay's hired men arrived at the Miller farm asking about erosion. Clay had sent him. He had been too proud to come himself. Ethan showed the young man the drainage gaps, the control strips, and the low section where the method had failed. Before the man left, Ethan handed him a copy of Samuel Miller's notebook page. At the bottom, Ethan had added his own sentence. A shield is not a miracle. Measure the result. Correct the mistake. Years later, people exaggerated the story. Some said Ethan's field produced twice as much as Clay's. It did not. Some said the stones created water. They did not. Some said Clay lost his farm. He did not. The truth was simpler and stronger. A poor young farmer took 12 acres everyone had dismissed. He trusted an old idea without worshiping it. He tested it. He corrected it. He endured a summer of humiliation without surrendering either his land or his dignity. And when harvest came, the field produced enough evidence to silence the people who had mistaken poverty for ignorance. The stones never grew a single ear of corn. They simply protected the ground long enough for the corn to do what it already knew how to do. Ethan kept farming. He kept the notebook. He kept the cottonwood tree. A few years later, Sarah Harrison told her father she intended to marry the rock farmer. Clay did not speak to her for 3 months. But he came to the wedding. He stood in the last row. He said nothing. Still, he was there. Sometimes change does not arrive as a grand apology. Sometimes it is simply a proud man showing up after running out of ways to pretend he was right. One evening in September of 1992, Ethan stood beside the cottonwood tree with his 4-year-old son. The boy had Sarah's eyes and Ethan's stubborn chin. Ethan lifted him toward the bark. "Put your hand here." The boy pressed his palm against the tree. Ethan carved a small line above his head. "What are you doing, Daddy?" "Something my father did for me." "And his father?" Ethan smiled. "Yes. His father, too. The boy did not understand yet. One day, he would. Ethan lifted his son onto his shoulders and looked across the south field. The gray stones remained between the rows, faded and half sunk into the earth. The summer had been dry. The corn was still standing. The whole county had watched Ethan carry those rocks and believed they were witnessing a young man destroy his future. They had been wrong. They had been watching him protect it. And sometimes the world laughs not because an idea is foolish, but because the truth has not reached harvest yet.